Welcome to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. And now your host, Tim Johnson.
The legislative special session ends in just 1 week, and there is still a significant budget gap to be made up for this fiscal year. The House and Senate are jockeying back and forth, and no one is quite sure what the outcome will be. With a background in accounting, State Representative Julie Stokes has emerged as a common sense voice who has studied the state budget inside and out. Julie joins us when we return on this edition of the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.
Since 1919, we've designed and constructed hundreds of industrial plants, roads, ships, dams, and executed some of the most complex jobs in the world. In fact, our quality and dependability are legendary. Today, the legend continues as Brown & Root delivers engineering, construction, maintenance, and industrial specialty services throughout the U.S. and the world from our headquarters here in Louisiana. We are Brown & Root.
In Baton Rouge, see your Good Neighbor State Farm agent Brady Flavin for your insurance and financial needs.
For over a quarter century, Kelly's has operated with honesty, integrity, and above all, safety. Kelly's features a fleet of quality equipment operated by dedicated, safety-minded employees skilled in land clearing, above-ground right-of-way maintenance, vegetation control, station yard and manned facility maintenance, above-ground pipeline support, and more. Kelly's Industrial Services, where pipeline right-of-way maintenance gets done right.
Consumers and property owners with construction projects can have a successful result or regretful experiences that could have been avoided. Before any construction project, verify licensure of the contractor and check references. Scammers will claim to be insured or bonded, so always check first. Download our app, LA Contractor, from the Android or Apple Store. Visit our website, lacontractor.org, or contact the Louisiana State Licensing Board for Contractors. We're here to help before things go wrong. Hire a licensed contractor. It's the law.
Welcome back to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Julie Stokes, State Representative from Jefferson Parish, is our guest. Julie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for giving us some of your time. I know how very busy you are. As I mentioned in the open, we have about a week left in the special legislative session, and we're obviously going to get into those issues as we move along in the show. But tell us about Julie Stokes. A little bit about your education, your background, your work. Tell us more.
Well, I grew up not far from my district in Jefferson Parish. I was educated in the Jefferson Parish school system through to my graduating from there and then moving on to UNO on scholarship and graduating there and then going to the Big Four. Well, it was Big Six back then, but the big accounting firms and starting my career there. And
worked as an accountant, a CPA, and now, as I understand it, you and your husband also have a business together that you do. Tell us a little bit about what you do there.
The business there is actually vocational rehab counseling. So he's very accomplished in that field. He holds license number 001 in voc rehab work. And so he got to a point a few years ago where he wanted somebody else to actually run the management of the company. And so that's what I've been doing.
And obviously pretty good at that with your background as well. So successful in business, successful as a CPA, working for a Big Six accounting firm at that time, in business with your husband. What made you get into politics?
You know, the accounting firms largely want their younger people and even their managers involved in the community. So in getting involved in the community, just one thing, a natural progression just led me to public policy, economic development policy, and of course tax policy. I just got really interested.
You are known for your policy work, for being someone who is very studied in the subtleties and the details of the policy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move along too, but I like to ask legislators this question. What's been most surprising for you in the legislature? Talk about it in general terms, and then let's talk specifically about this special session and the rancor that we've seen there.
I think First, I would have said in my first year, the most surprising was how much I really enjoyed all the people. I mean, we work with an interesting group, very dynamic. Almost everybody up there is passionate about what they're doing. We might have different opinions, but a very passionate, hearty discussion all the time, and that's really it's wonderful.
And maybe a little bit surprising, because what you see most of the time from the outside in the news media is just mostly about the arguments that take place up there, right?
Right. And so now, after, being in my second term, my fourth session, and getting so involved in policy, both from a macro perspective and also from the weeds, because you have to understand the weeds of tax policy to be able to legislate with regard to the macro, right? So when you're in the weeds and you're developing what you seem to think is like apparently just such good policy, and yet are we going to legislate with regard, or are we going to legislate based on what's good policy? Or are we going to legislate based on what's politically expedient?
What's easiest, right?
Yes, and it's always been my focus to try to legislate based on what's good policy, and sometimes that's difficult.
And that's one of the things I think that leads us to the next question, right? I think that as we've covered on this show over the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've talked to business leaders and governmental leaders, that we've sort of had this kick the can down the road mentality, right? And so however you want to describe it, the chickens are sort of coming home to roost now, right? That we've run out of this one-time money, we've run out of the ability to take settlements and other things and apply them to recurring revenue, and we find ourselves now with a $940 million hole, give or take a few million here or there for this current fiscal year, which ends at the end of June, and some $2 billion plus in terms of the deficit that we are facing for the fiscal year that begins July 1. Now, everyone knows what the price of oil and the drop that, the impact that that's had. Every dollar that the price of oil drops impacts the state budget by about $12 million, as I understand it. So that's significant. But it really has been this idea that we're not legislating toward good policy, we're legislating towards what's easiest. Give us your perspective on how we got here.
Well, there's a long answer in history. I see two kick the cans. Right. I mean, when you say what you said, there's definitely two patterns of kicking the can. Back in 2002-03, we enacted the Stelly Plan. Right. And that was a revenue neutral tax reform where we exempted a lot of different sales taxes and then increased individual income tax. Well, when we did that, then in 2007 and 8, you roll forward, okay? In 2007 and 8, we decided to get rid of the income generators out of this revenue neutral plan. We did that in a time when things were very good. We had a lot of money. It was a post-Katrina boom.
Right.
Ever since then, we've had significant problems balancing the budget. Starting in about 2010, when those receipts from that Stelly Plan
evaporated, right.
You see a gap in our structure that has caused us to have to deal with this problem for 6 straight years. And so there's been a lot of kicking the can down the road there. With cuts are good ways to, not exactly kicking the can, but we've had cuts, the use of one-time money, the use of a lot of gimmicks to try to take money from this fund, like the trust fund for the elderly. You look at the things that happen with the office group benefits and the fund balance there. There were a lot of things done to kick the can down the road. What I'm afraid of right now is that we're in a position right now to stop kicking the can down the road. And what I see happening right at this moment is some more kicking the can down the road.
The same sort of stopgap measures that we've looked at before. We're using some one-time money, we're using some BP settlement money, we're doing some different things like that. All right, so we got about a minute left in this segment, and one of the things that I often search for is the truth, right? So you hear folks on one side of the ledger saying, we've got a revenue problem. You hear folks on the other side of the ledger saying, no, we've got a spending problem. You can find statistics that will bear out those facts on either side depending on what you quote. In 30 seconds, and maybe we'll come back to it in the next segment as well, what's your opinion? Do we have a revenue problem or a spending problem?
Right now, if you look over from 2005, which was the last normal year because it ended June 30th before Katrina, and you compare that to 2016's budget, that budget has kept up with inflation, not quite. We're about $200 million below inflation if you take out Medicaid vendor payments. On the revenue side, if you look at revenue since '92, you see a nice linear line, and right now we've got a $1.75 billion gap.
So there is a major issue, and that's what we'll focus on when we come back.
Perfect.
We're visiting with State Representative Julie Stokes, and you're watching the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.
For more than 25 years, the TJC Group has been helping industry communicate and build relationships with communities, elected officials, and governmental agencies. We are the leading firm in the U.S. for the development, management, and facilitation of industry-based community advisory panels.
Whether you're building a new facility or you manage an existing business, let us put our community and governmental relations experience to work for you.
The TJC Group, facilitating solutions for business and industry.
It might be one of the most efficient, most effective methods of communications we've ever used.
Since 1919, we've designed and constructed hundreds of industrial plants, roads, ships, dams, and executed some of the most complex jobs in the world. In fact, our quality and dependability are legendary. Today, the legend continues as Brown & Root delivers engineering, construction, maintenance, and industrial specialty services throughout the U.S. and the world from our headquarters here in Louisiana. We are Brown & Root.
What if I said that the American dream is alive and well, and that it exists for anyone willing to build it? That the power of a nation does not reside in its monuments, but in the hearts and minds of those who built them, and that the country's greatest heroes also wear hard hats. In today's America, it's not enough to dream about the future. You have to build it. Build your future at byf.org.
Welcome back to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Our guest is State Representative Julie Stokes, and we're talking about legislative budgets, tax policy, all those kind of things. During the break, you mentioned that we had talked in the last segment about this whole idea that we, for whatever reason, from a budgetary standpoint, have continuously kicked this can down the road instead of coming up with long-term structural solutions. Right. We've legislated for what was easiest and most expedient, as you said. So tell us a little bit more about what you're talking about there.
Well, right now, what I'm concerned, when I look at the policy options that we have, we've had the Tax Foundation studying Louisiana, we've had Jim Richardson studying Louisiana, we've had all this tax research, the Tax Foundation part commissioned by the Committee of 100. We've toured the state talking about what good policy would look like. Mm-hmm. We have the opportunity right now to enact that. We have the opportunity to make all of that happen. But I think that politically, people are uncomfortable with doing the things you need to do to make it happen. So we're going to do things like actually make our sales tax base worse. We're already ranked 50th in our sales tax structure. We could make sales tax worse. And I'm afraid that we're going to end up having to raise our sales tax by 2 pennies. We're already the highest sales tax in the country. So not only are we going to be high beyond belief, but we're also going to do more to damage one of the other things that makes us so poorly ranked.
It's an interesting thought. So let me ask you about doing those tough and those structural things now. What impact does that have on if we did all of that today, what impact does that have on the current fiscal year's budget deficit?
Well, okay, right now we've made several different reforms to corporate income tax. Those things, some of them are moving through the system. Most of those are positioned right now as revenue neutral because of the way the fiscal office, who does our fiscal notes and how much a bill's going to cost to raise, the way that they have to operate. I think in the long run, it's going to bring some fairness to the corporate tax arena in Louisiana. In sales tax, we're ranked 50th because we're one of like 5 states left that have a different, what's taxable in Jefferson Parish is different than what's taxable in Caddo Parish and is different than what's taxable in Louisiana. And right now, one of my efforts, which is the Sales Tax Streamlining Commission, we're seeking to line those bases up so that we can be like the other states.
I want to get into the constitutional and statutory dedication discussion, but tell us a little bit more about this streamlining commission that you're working on.
Well, right now what we've found is that the biggest reason, there's 3 big problems with sales tax in Louisiana. Number 1, our rate is very high. Number 2, we have those different bases.
Right.
And number 3, we have decentralized collection, which means that you could get audited by Jefferson and then a few weeks later get it audited by Caddo and then a few weeks later get it audited by Orleans.
And they're all looking for different things.
And they're all looking for different things. Now, what I would like to see happen is that in this session, when we're talking about adding clean pennies to our sales tax base, for them not to be different than all the other pennies.
And let's make sure our viewers know what we're talking about. When we say a clean penny, that means a penny added to the sales tax with no exemptions.
That's right. But there's no definition of clean because things keep getting added back. So we have a few bills going through the process right now, one of which is a clean penny by one representative, another clean penny by another representative that doesn't look like that clean penny. And I even have a clean penny bill that I'm trying to clean all 4 pennies so that we have the same base.
Ladies and gentlemen, the cleanest money in the United States will exist in the Louisiana legislature with all these clean pennies.
I wouldn't count on it.
Yeah, that's right. Let's talk about this whole idea of the statutory and constitutional dedications that many people believe hamper our ability to fund priorities. Now, there's some misinformation out there about that, right? You see these reports in the news media that say we're giving away $7.5 to $8 billion in these exemptions. But the truth of the matter is, you can't solve the problem on the back of the exemptions, can you?
Well, yeah, now there's 2 different issues. We have the exemptions, that the tax exemption budget, which is all of our tax spending.
Right, and the dedication.
Right, so in 2014, those totals, which is the latest ones I have access to, were $7.7 billion. So lots of people run around talking about how we've got spending $7.7 billion on tax spending. But when you start to look into that, about $1 billion of it are the STELI exemptions.
Right.
Which are constitutional. You also have things like the S corporation exclusion, which the S corporation exclusion prevents double taxation. You can't get rid of that. You also have federal deductibility for individual filers and for corporate filers. Unless we pass a constitutional amendment, you can't get rid of that. That's over $1 billion. When you start to whittle down all those kind of things that I'm talking about, the number comes way down as to what's corporate giveaways and talking about tax spending. And then on the front of the statutory dedications, when you really look into those numbers, you find out that 41% of all of our dedicated spending is for the Transportation Trust Fund. We've got a $12 billion road backlog. I don't think we're going to raid that to fix the general fund. Then you've got a whole other body of things which are based on fees for a specified purpose. It would not, I don't even think, be legal to take those things out and put them in the state general fund. Then you've got another realm of items, some of which have a bill running through the system right now. But the thing is that a lot of those funding priorities that were unlocked actually already fund state general funds. So you can unlock them, but in the end, they're still going to have to go to...
If they're a priority, you still have to fund those issues,
They're
right?
still going to have to go to education, higher ed, and healthcare.
Well, the MFP is one of those huge, dedications that we talk... Explain that, the minimum
MFP,
foundation formula.
Yeah, so once the legislature sets that per student MFP amount in the general session or in the legislative session, that amount becomes then non-discretionary funds. So once it becomes non-discretionary, it's out of our purvey, so to speak. And that's why when we looked at cuts legislatively this session, right now, we could only cut the Department of Education. You really can't cut the MFP right at this moment.
You can't cut what goes directly to the parish as well. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about what we think is going to happen now with the last week of the legislative session. We're visiting with State Representative Julie Stokes, and you're watching the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.
For more than 20 years, the TJC Group has been helping companies assess their training needs and to develop programs that improve the effectiveness and productivity of their teams.
Training doesn't have to be expensive or complicated. Let us put our experience and expertise to work for you.
The TJC Group, facilitating solutions for business and industry.
It might be one of the most efficient, most effective methods of communications we've ever used.
In Baton Rouge, see your Good Neighbor State Farm agent Brady Flavin for your insurance and financial needs.
What if I said that whatever good things you build you? And that in this economy, sweat never loses its value? What if I said that there isn't a challenge in the world too great for a craft professional with the right tools? And that the steps that lead from where you are to where you want to be can only be built by you. Build your future at byf.org.
Welcome back to the Louisiana Business and Industry Show. Our guest is State Representative Julie Stokes. Rapid fire succession here at the beginning. 3 issues that we hear a lot about. Give me your thoughts. Fraud, abuse, and waste in state government, particularly Medicaid. We hear a lot about that. Higher education funding. We hear about how much we've disinvested in higher education over the years and the impact that the leaders of higher education say that it's having. Right. And you mentioned it earlier, but we've got this huge infrastructure transportation funding backlog. So hit those. But let's start with fraud, abuse, and waste in state government.
You know, right now, as I think I mentioned, the only item in state government in the 11 years that has increased significantly above inflation is Medicaid vendor payments. So I have a bill right now being heard to let the legislative auditor do more auditing in that area. I feel like the people's auditor, our eyes and ears, needs to get a better look at that. I'm having trouble getting that through the system right now because people are worried about what it will cost. It's a 50-50 match.
They're worried about what it will cost to do more auditing.
Yes.
Okay.
And my problem is that it is my responsibility to make sure that we get these audits done. If there's fraud, waste, and abuse in Medicaid, we need to identify it. But I want to keep firing off, because we have a bunch of topics.
Higher education.
Higher education. We have had the largest, most draconian cuts in the nation. If you go to, I can tell you my alma mater, UNO, it's so sparse over there that it has an absolutely downtrodden feel. I love my university. I need to support it. I get the fact that we need to reduce spending and we need to streamline, but we need to really address how we're going to streamline if that's the will. Infrastructure transportation backlog, we've got a $12 billion deficit in terms of a need to fund road projects. Right. I actually believe that the people of the state want their legislators to raise the fuel tax. It's an impossible thing to do. It's not politically. But it's not in
we talk about courage, right?
Courage.
Right.
It's not in this particular legislative call. We worked out a bill that would let the people decide, and I don't know if we can get it through the system. And it's to eliminate the sales tax exemption on gasoline, partially so that the people could actually make the decision without us having to stand in the way.
We have got to do, you think about it from an economic development standpoint, higher education, including our community and technical college system, infrastructure, transportation, and backlog, those things lead to economic development, and they're critically important to the growth of our economy. Now, I'm going to hit this for about 30 seconds, and I want your opinion before we talk about what we think is eventually going to happen in this special legislative session as we wrap the show up. I know I oversimplify, but I say this often to a lot of folks who are on this show, is that how we ought to be set up to budget in this state is say, let's identify our top 4 priorities. If education is number 1, let's decide what a world-class system of education looks like without fraud, waste, and abuse. Let's put it in place, let's fund it appropriately, and demand excellence from it. Yes. If infrastructure is number 2, let's do the same thing. If healthcare is number 3, let's do the same thing. If public safety is number 4, let's do the same thing. And once we have properly funded our real priorities, then let's fight over whatever's left. But that's not what we do here, is it?
Right now, the focus is on, in my opinion, further cuts to something that is just barely and not quite kept up with inflation.
Right.
We have a chance right now to move forward and create tax policy that will set headlines all across this nation of saying that Louisiana's on the right road.
And we're going to be different.
And we're going to be different.
See, I don't believe while in wasting a single dime of taxpayers' money, but I also believe in properly funding those things that we ought to have as our priorities and demanding excellence from them. We spread our resources so thinly among so many constituents that we really can't do anything well, and that's where we've got to get to. So let me shift gears because we're running out of time, and I know we want to get to some things here. So we're in the third week of the special session. We got 1 week left as we tape today on Wednesday. Now the show airs on Thursday. We're 1 week away from the end of the special session. We've got all these pennies floating around. Are we going to do a clean penny? Are we going to clean some of the existing pennies? Are we going to add pennies? Are we going to cut other things? Are we going to raise taxes on business? Because this sales tax on fuels and utilities is a critical issue for the business community. Mm-hmm. Look into your crystal ball. What do you think is going to happen?
Right now, Senate Finance is hearing the bill that would further cut state spending, and it's a pretty large cut. It's 85% of the Department of Education's budget for the rest of the year. We have been told that today's the last day that something can move off of the House floor and go through the process. Now, I'm sure we can find another day in there. Right. That's how this thing kind of works. If today is the last day, then there's a few bills that either they move, and if they don't move, I don't see any way out of having 2 pennies of sales tax. And quite frankly, I think that's what we're going to get back from the Senate, is 2 pennies of sales tax. And that's not acceptable. That's a bad policy. It's not the right way to do it. It's going to mess up our sales tax base and give us the highest ever sales tax in a state.
Hopefully, cooler heads will prevail and we'll find others. We got about 30 seconds left, and I hate to put you on the spot this way. Mm-hmm. Okay. But we are in a very competitive situation as we compete for jobs. What's your message to the business community who is concerned about having their taxes raised?
Right now, we're in a position where one of the biggest holes in our revenue comes from individual income taxes. Now, because nobody wants to have that conversation, we have been forced to do draconian cuts, and we're also being forced to level this entire thing against the business community. And quite frankly, if we don't stop that, we're going to stop job creation. We need to make a system that's fair, transparent, and predictable for those companies.
Predictability is what they're looking for. We're running out of time. Yes. I want to have you back on the show because we got so much more to talk about. Julie Stokes, thanks for your time.
Very much pleasure.
That's a quick wrap, guys. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week at this very same time for another edition of the Louisiana Business and Industry Show.